Welcome, everyone. Tonight we explore the Egyptian philosophy of death, judgment, and the afterlife. As you settle down and get comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe for more soothing tales on philosophers and myths of the past. Now, let's begin. Painted on wooden coffins that lay in quieter tombs, the same spells that once guarded a pyramid now guided a provincial governor, and in time even modest burials could echo royal formulas, suggesting that the journey through the duat and the hope of judgment survived was no longer the preserve of a single divine king, but a path for many. The new kingdom, with its warrior pharaohs, vast temples, and empire stretching beyond the Nile Valley, added still more layers to this complex tapestry of the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, written on papyrus and tucked beside the mummy, functioned as a portable map, a ritual manual for navigating gates, guardians, and the weighing of the heart itself. Political upheavals, the Hyksos in the Second Intermediate Period, later the Assyrians and Persians, tested the resilience of this vision. Yet the core symbolism of judgment before Osiris, of the heart balanced against the feather of Maat, remained remarkably stable, like the steady return of the inundation. In the late period and beyond, when Greeks and then Romans ruled the Nile, Egyptian and Hellenistic philosophies began to mingle. The many parts of the person, the Ka, Ba, and Ach, were contemplated alongside Greek notions of the immortal psyche. Isis was honored from Alexandria to Rome, and ideas of a morally judged afterlife helped prepare the ground for later religious syntheses in this ancient land. Empires changed, languages shifted, temples fell into ruin, yet the question at the center of these beliefs did not dissolve. As dynasties rose and vanished into sand and memory, what remained constant was the quiet, insistent wondering what truly awaited each person in the darkness beyond death, and how, spell by spell and deed by deed, could they prepare their heart for the scales that still lie ahead in the story we are about to enter. And to understand what they believed awaited them, we have to return to the land itself, to the quiet drama that unfolded each year along the Nile, shaping every thought about death and renewal. Egyptian mythology did not float above the landscape as abstract doctrine. It was rooted, quite literally, in water, soil, and stone, in a geography that continues to captivate us when we imagine its slow, cyclical rhythms. Each year the river rose, not violently, but as a gentle, predictable miracle, spilling over its banks and turning the valley into a sheet of dark water. When those waters receded, they left behind the black, glistening silt the Egyptians called the Kemet, the fertile land from which their entire civilization sprang. In this measured inundation, in this alternation between submersion and emergence, they saw a pattern, a kind of seasonal death and rebirth that offered profound wisdom about what might happen when the human body was laid down, seemingly drowned in silence, only to rise again in another form. If we picture the Nile from above, we see a narrow ribbon of green, fields and villages clinging to the river's edge, and beyond that, on either side, an immense sea of sand. This contrast between the cultivated strip and the vast desert was not only a physical fact, it became a central piece of their symbolism, a complex tapestry of meanings about order and chaos. The green floodplain was the realm of life, of cosmic order, of Maat, maintained through ritual and labor. while the encircling desert was both protective barrier and threatening beyond, a dry, burning region associated with danger, wandering spirits, and the unsettling presence of what lay outside the known world. Overhead, another cycle unfolded with equal regularity. The sun rose in the east, crossed the sky in radiant strength, and sank in the west, disappearing into an unseen realm. For the Egyptians, this daily journey of Ra was not a simple metaphor, but a living reality, a model for the soul's own voyage. They imagined the sun traveling through the Duat at night, a hidden landscape of caverns, gates, and serpents, where the gods battled chaos so that dawn could return. Across 3 millennia, details of this nocturnal voyage shifted, yet what remained constant was the assurance that the sun would be reborn, and that a justified soul might accompany it, emerging with the first light. Because the west was where the sun appeared to die, the western desert edge became the natural threshold between life and the afterlife. Tombs and great necropolises rose there, from the Old Kingdom pyramids at Giza to the rock-cut chambers of the Valley of the Kings, all facing back toward the life-giving river, yet rooted in the dry, unchanging stone. To walk from the villages on the east bank, cross the Nile, and climb into the western cliffs, to enact step by step the passage from the world of breathing bodies into the domain of the dead, and to trust that this movement into stillness was only half of a larger cycle. As we embark on this exploration of Egyptian beliefs about judgment and the soul, you can feel yourself mirroring that landscape. Your body lies quiet, like fields at night. Your breath slows like waters receding after the flood, and your thoughts drift westward into the inner desert where noise falls away. In this resting, you are not ending anything. You are participating in a rhythm the Egyptians knew intimately, a pause before a new dawn. And just as they trusted that the sun would rise and the river would return, they trusted that the heart, if kept in balance with Maat, could awaken beyond death, ready for the weighing that awaits in the next part of our journey. And so, as the imagined scales of your own heart settle into stillness, we turn from the scene of judgment to a quieter question. How do we even know what the Egyptian dead expected to face beyond that threshold? The desert has swallowed cities, the Nile has shifted its course, yet in the dark interiors of pyramids and tombs, whispers in stone and ink continue to guide us. The earliest of these whispers are the pyramid texts, carved high within the stone chambers of Old Kingdom royal pyramids, never meant to be seen by living eyes, only to be heard by the gods and the enduring soul of the king. Here we find spells that urge the dead king to ascend like a falcon, to climb the ladder of light, to join Ra in his solar bark and sit among the imperishable stars. These inscriptions are not systematic theology, they are fragments of oral tradition that was already ancient when the first hieroglyph was cut into limestone. As we embark on this exploration across 3 millennia, we watch those royal prerogatives slowly open outward. In the Middle Kingdom, similar spells begin to appear on the wooden coffins of high officials and provincial elites, forming what we now call the Coffin Texts, a complex tapestry of inherited formulas, new compositions, and local variations. What had once been the guarded privilege of kings becomes, at least for some, a shareable technology of the afterlife, a democratization of sacred knowledge that allowed more Egyptians to hope they might navigate the Duat and stand in the presence of the gods.
Later still, in the New Kingdom, the so-called Book of the Dead emerges, not a single book, but individualized parchment scrolls placed beside the mummy, each one a curated selection of spells, maps, hymns, and vivid vignettes tailored to a particular person's name, status, and fears. One scroll might emphasize joining Ra's cosmic journey, another the fertile fields of Osiris, another the precise passwords needed at each gate. Here we see Egyptian mythology as a living reality, adjusted and reconfigured for each new life and each new death. It would be comforting to imagine a single fixed scripture, a tidy canon that settled every question, yet what remained constant was exactly the opposite. A fluid, overlapping body of texts, temple inscriptions, and spoken ritual, changing from region to region and century to century. Pattern interrupt, there is no Egyptian Bible to which we can simply turn. Instead, we sift through layers of reuse and reinvention, where the same spell may invoke different gods, and the same journey through the afterlife may follow different paths. Many of our most familiar images, the weighing of the heart, the winding rivers of the Duat, the monstrous Amit crouched by the scales, come not from grand doctrinal treatises, but from painted tomb walls and delicately illustrated papyri, tiny illuminated windows into a much larger imaginative universe now mostly lost. A single scene might show Anubis tending the mummy, Thoth recording the verdict, and the deceased joyfully harvesting in the fields of reeds, compressing an entire philosophy of death and renewal into one continuous band of color and symbolism. What reaches us, then, is partial and flickering, yet it continues to captivate us, because behind each damaged spell and faded painting we sense a consistent confidence that death could be navigated with the right knowledge, the right ritual, the alignment with Maat. In the next part of our journey, we will follow that knowledge as if it were our own, tracing the soul's passage step by step through the hidden landscape these texts only begin to reveal.
Painted on wooden coffins that lay in quieter tombs, the same spells that once guarded a pyramid now guided a provincial governor. And in time, even modest burials could echo royal formulas, suggesting that the journey through the Duat and the hope of judgment survived was no longer the preserve of a single divine king, but a path for many. The New Kingdom, with its warrior pharaohs, vast temples, and empire stretching beyond the Nile Valley, added still more layers to this complex tapestry of the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, written on papyrus and tucked beside the mummy, functioned as a portable map, a ritual manual for navigating gates, guardians, and the weighing of the heart itself. Political upheavals, the Hyksos in the Second Intermediate Period, later the Assyrians and Persians, tested the resilience of this vision. Yet the core symbolism of judgment before Osiris, of the heart balanced against the feather of Maat, remained remarkably stable, like the steady return of the inundation. In the late period and beyond, when Greeks and then Romans ruled the Nile, Egyptian and Hellenistic philosophies began to mingle. The many parts of the person, the Ka, Ba, and Akh, were contemplated alongside Greek notions of the immortal psyche. Isis was honored from Alexandria to Rome, and ideas of a morally judged afterlife helped prepare the ground for later religious syntheses in this ancient land. Empires changed, languages shifted, temples fell into ruin, yet the question at the center of these beliefs did not dissolve. As dynasties rose and vanished into sand and memory,
What remained constant was the quiet, insistent wondering. What truly awaited each person in the darkness beyond death, and how, spell by spell and deed by deed, could they prepare their heart for the scales that still lie ahead in the story we are about to enter? And to understand what they believed awaited them, we have to return to the land itself, to the quiet drama that unfolded each year along the Nile, shaping every thought about death and renewal. Egyptian mythology did not float above the landscape as abstract doctrine. It was rooted quite literally in water, soil, and stone, in a geography that continues to captivate us when we imagine its slow, cyclical rhythms. Each year the Nile rose, not violently, but as a gentle, predictable miracle, spilling over its banks and turning the valley into a sheet of dark water. When those waters receded, they left behind the black, glistening silt the Egyptians called the Kemet, the fertile land from which their entire civilization sprang. In this measured inundation, in this alternation between submergence and emergence, they saw a pattern, a kind of seasonal death and rebirth that offered profound wisdom about what might happen when the human body was laid down, seemingly drowned in silence, only to rise again in another form. If we picture the Nile from above, we see a narrow ribbon of green, fields and villages clinging to the river's edge, and beyond that, on either side, an immense sea of sand. This contrast between the cultivated strip and the vast desert was not only a physical fact, it became a central piece of their symbolism, a complex tapestry of meanings about order and chaos. The green floodplain was the realm of life, of cosmic order, of Mat maintained through ritual and labor, while the encircling desert was both protective barrier and threatening beyond, a dry, burning region associated with danger, wandering spirits, and the unsettling presence of what lay outside the known world. Overhead, another cycle unfolded in equal regularity. The sun rose in the east, crossed the sky in radiant strength, and sank in the west, disappearing into an unseen realm. For the Egyptians, this daily journey of Ra was not a simple metaphor, but a living reality, a model for the soul's own voyage. They imagined the sun traveling through the Duat at night, a hidden landscape of caverns, gates, and serpents, where the gods battled chaos so that dawn could return. Across 3 millennia, details of this nocturnal voyage shifted, yet what remained constant was the assurance that the sun would be reborn, and that a justified soul might accompany it, emerging with the first light. Because the west was where the sun appeared to die, the western desert edge became the natural threshold between life and the afterlife. Tombs and great necropolis rose there, from the Old Kingdom pyramids at Giza to the rock-cut chambers of the Valley of the Kings, all facing back toward the life-giving river, yet rooted in the dry, unchanging stone. To walk from the villages on the east bank, cross the Nile, and climb into the western cliffs was to enact step by step the passage from the world of breathing bodies into the domain of the dead, and to trust that this movement into stillness was only half of a larger cycle. As we embark on this exploration of Egyptian beliefs about judgment and the soul, you can feel yourself mirroring that landscape. Your body lies quiet like fields at night. Your breath slows like waters receding after the flood. And your thoughts drift westward into the inner desert where noise falls away. In this resting, you are not ending anything. You are participating in a rhythm the Egyptians knew intimately, a pause before a new dawn. And just as they trusted that the sun would rise and the river would return, they trusted that the heart, if kept in balance with Maat, could awaken beyond death, ready for the weighing that awaits in the next part of our journey.
And so, as the imagined scales of your own heart settle into stillness, we turn from the scene of judgment to a quieter question. How do we even know what the Egyptian dead expected to face beyond that threshold? The desert has swallowed cities, the Nile has shifted its course, and yet in the dark interiors of pyramids and tombs, whispers in stone and ink continue to guide us. The earliest of these whispers are the pyramid texts, carved high within the stone chambers of Old Kingdom royal pyramids, never meant to be seen by living eyes, only to be heard by the gods and the king's enduring soul. Here we find spells that urge the dead pharaoh to ascend like a falcon, to climb the ladder of light, to join Ra in his solar bark and sit among the imperishable stars. These inscriptions are not systematic theology, they are fragments of oral tradition that had already been ancient when the first hieroglyph was cut into limestone. As we embark on this exploration across 3 millennia, we watch those royal prerogatives slowly open outward. In the Middle Kingdom, similar spells begin to appear on the wooden coffins of high officials and provincial elites, forming what we now call the Coffin Texts, a complex tapestry of inherited formulas, new compositions, and local variations. What had once been the guarded privilege of kings becomes, at least for some, a shareable technology of the afterlife, a democratization of sacred knowledge that allowed more Egyptians to hope they might navigate the duat and stand in the presence of the gods. Later still, in the New Kingdom, the so-called Book of the Dead emerges, not a single book, but individualized papyrus scrolls placed beside the mummy, each one a curated selection of spells, maps, hymns, and vivid vignettes tailored to a particular person's name, status, and fears. One scroll might emphasize joining Ra's cosmic journey, another the fertile fields of Osiris, another the precise passwords needed at each gate. Here we see Egyptian mythology as a living reality, adjusted and reconfigured for each new life and each new death. It would be comforting to imagine a single fixed scripture, a tidy canon that settled every question. Yet what remained constant was exactly the opposite, a fluid, overlapping body of texts, temple inscriptions, and spoken ritual, changing from region to region and century to century. Pattern interrupt. There is no Egyptian Bible to which we can simply turn. Instead, we sift through layers of reuse and reinvention, where the same spell may invoke different gods, and the same journey through the afterlife may follow different paths. Many of our most familiar images, the weighing of the heart, the winding rivers of the Duat, the monstrous Amet crouched by the scales, come not from grand doctrinal treatises, but from painted tomb walls and delicately illustrated papyri, tiny illuminated windows into a much larger imaginative universe now mostly lost. A single scene might show Anubis tending the mummy, Thoth recording the verdict, and the deceased joyfully harvesting in the fields of reeds, compressing an entire philosophy of death and renewal into one continuous band of color and symbolism.
What reaches us then is partial and flickering, yet it continues to captivate us, because behind each damaged spell and faded painting we sense a consistent confidence that death could be navigated with the right knowledge, the right ritual, the correct alignment with Ma'at. In the next part of our journey, we will follow that knowledge as if it were our own, tracing the soul's passage step by step through the hidden landscape these texts only begin to reveal. And yet, as we move from those fragile spells and painted tomb walls into the wider horizon of Egyptian mythology, we discover something quietly astonishing. There was no single sacred book, no one fixed scripture to which every priest and every mourner had to submit, and yet the system held together with remarkable coherence across 3 millennia. Egyptian religion was not a rigid code, but a living reality, an evolving conversation between temples, cities, and generations of storytellers. In this complex tapestry of beliefs, even the gods themselves could change, merge, and unfold into new forms without shattering the cosmic order they guarded. A local wind and fertility god of Thebes could ascend through political power and theological reflection to become Amun-Ra, fused with the solar creator, wearing the plumed crown and the radiant disk together. Other deities, too, could overlap and intertwine, as when Ptah of Memphis absorbed creative functions, or when lioness and cow goddesses blurred at the edges, revealing that identity in Egyptian mythology was often layered rather than exclusive. Different cities told different stories about creation, and yet these stories were allowed to stand side by side like neighboring shrines along the Nile. In Heliopolis, priests spoke of Atum rising from the primeval waters, generating the first gods through an act of solitary self-creation. In Memphis, theologians praised Ptah, who conceived the world in his heart and brought it forth by speech alone. In Hermopolis, sages honored the Octoad, 8 primordial deities whose interplay gave rise to a cosmic egg from which the sun emerged. None of these needed to cancel the others. They were complementary windows onto the same mysterious beginning. As we embark on this exploration of Egyptian thought, we also notice how porous the boundaries of the pantheon could be, especially in later periods when foreign rule and contact intensified. Deities from Nubia, Syria, and eventually Greece could be welcomed, adapted, and woven into existing frameworks, their images redrawn with Egyptian crowns, their myths reframed through familiar symbolism. The civilization did not so much defend a closed system as continually reinterpret the world in its own sacred language. Yet amid this fluidity, what remained was a single luminous axis, Ma'at. Ma'at was at once an abstract principle and a goddess, the embodiment of truth, justice, balance, and right order in both the human realm and the cosmic architecture. She is often shown as a woman with an ostrich feather upon her head, and that feather, light and deceptively simple, would one day be the standard against which every individual heart was weighed. For the Egyptians, this was not metaphor alone, but a concrete expectation about the afterlife and divine judgment. To live in accordance with Ma'at meant speaking truth, honoring promises, performing proper ritual, and sustaining harmony within family, community, and state. To violate Ma'at meant to invite Isfet, disorder and untruth, which threatened not only social stability, but the very renewal of creation. Understanding Maat, then, becomes essential for understanding why funerary preparation was so meticulous, why moral conduct and correct ritual were seen as inseparable, and why the weighing of the heart scene continues to captivate us when we see it painted on tomb walls. In the next part of our journey, we will follow that moment step by careful step until the verdict of the heart can no longer be postponed.
And yet, that solitary heart before the scales was never only an isolated soul in a silent chamber. It was the endpoint of an entire system, a vast sacred machine that had been quietly supporting it since birth. In Egyptian mythology, death and judgment were not private events detached from the world, but moments in which the whole civilization, its kings, its temples, and its daily rituals revealed their deeper purpose. At the center of this system stood the pharaoh, a figure who was at once human and divine, walking a careful line between earth and sky. In life, he was Horus, the falcon god of kingship, vision, and protection, and in death he became Osiris, the lord of the underworld and model of resurrection, so that his own passage into the afterlife served as a prototype for everyone else. Across 3 millennia, dynasties rose and fell, capitals shifted, and foreign rulers took the throne. Yet what remained constant was this theology of divine kingship, in which the ruler's personal journey beyond death guaranteed that the path would remain open for his people. Around the king, like organs in a single body, the temples of Egypt were arranged with deliberate care, each one a carefully oriented cosmic junction where heaven, earth, and the unseen depths met. Their axes aligned with the Nile, with the rising sun, with particular stars, so that when a priest crossed from the bright outer court into the dark, incense-filled sanctuary, he was retracing the passage from creation into the hidden source of power. These buildings were not merely places of worship, they were engines of renewal, designed through intricate symbolism to sustain the gods themselves and to keep the fabric of creation from fraying. Each morning, while fields were irrigated and markets opened, another quieter labor unfolded within those walls. Priests washed and clothed the statue of the god, awakened it with hymns, presented bread, beer, and fragrant oils, and recited formulae that had been preserved, adapted, and reinterpreted as we embark on this exploration of changing Egyptian beliefs. To the Egyptian mind, these were not optional devotions, but necessary operations, daily liturgies without which the cosmos might slip back toward the primordial waters of chaos, the sun might falter in its course, and the judgment hall of Osiris might never open its doors. For ordinary men and women who would never enter the deepest sanctuaries, this sacred machinery was still a living reality, felt in festivals, processions, and the simple confidence that as long as king and priesthood upheld Maat through ritual, the invisible framework that made a just afterlife possible would endure. Your trust in the pharaoh's offerings, in the burning of incense, in the careful utterance of names and spells, was also a trust that their own hearts would one day find fair scales and a stable world beyond the tomb. As you lie here now, perhaps you notice your own smaller rituals, the way you turn off the last light, arrange your pillows, place a glass of water within reach, and let your breathing settle into a gentle rhythm.
These are modest gestures, yet they too are acts of order against the encroaching dark, small affirmations that the passage into sleep will be safe and that you will find your way back with the dawn. In the next part of our journey, we will follow the soul itself as it steps from this carefully maintained world into the duat, through gates and guardians, guided by texts and prayers, to discover what awaited beyond the judgment of the heart.
Yet beyond the temples and the carefully aligned tombs, there was another, quieter landscape of devotion, one that unfolded in the dim interiors of simple homes, where oil lamps flickered against mud-brick walls, and the business of living and dying intertwined in intimate ways. If the great cults and funerary monuments mapped the official path through death and the afterlife, it was here, in these modest spaces, that Egyptian mythology became a living reality, woven into childbirth, sleep, illness, and the fragile hopes of ordinary families. In the corner of a one-room house, pressed between a storage jar and a sleeping mat, a tiny domestic shrine might stand, fashioned from mud brick or wood, bearing small figurines of the gods who guarded the most vulnerable thresholds of existence. The squat, leonine dwarf Bes, with his fierce face and protruding tongue, watched over childbirth and the terrors of the night, while the pregnant hippopotamus goddess Taweret, heavy and protective, stood as a bulwark against miscarriage, fever, and bad dreams. These images were not distant symbols, but immediate presences. Incense, a whispered prayer, or a simple offering of bread and beer turned the household itself into a sanctuary where cosmic order could be invited to dwell. The rhythm of the year also carried this sense that the vast structures of creation bent down toward everyday life. Festivals tied to the Nile flood, to the rising of Sirius, or to the joyful return of a wandering goddess, allowed farmers, potters, and weavers to step into the same cosmic patterns that governed the journey of the soul. When the inundation arrived and people celebrated the renewed fertility of the fields, they were also rehearsing, in ritual and symbolism, the promise that death would be followed by rebirth, that the dry land of the grave would one day be covered again by the waters of life. Within families, the boundary between the living and the dead remained permeable, sustained by acts that speak to fundamental human concerns about memory, justice, and love. On pottery shards or scraps of papyrus, people wrote letters to the dead, addressing parents, spouses, or children who had passed on, asking them to intercede in disputes, to heal illnesses, or to stop troubling dreams. The deceased were not gone. They were powerful neighbors in another realm, participants in a complex tapestry of relationships that continued across 3 millennia of Egyptian history, where what remained constant was the conviction that bonds of obligation survived the grave. Amulets and spoken charms completed this domestic theology of protection. A child might wear a small faience amulet in the shape of an eye, a scarab, or a tiny bess, while a healer murmured incantations against snakebite, fever, or the invisible arrows of malevolent forces. These were not separate beliefs about judgment and the duat. The same unseen powers who threatened the living were thought to lurk along the post-mortem path, and the same protective names and formulas could shield the soul.
In this way, every lullaby accompanied by a prayer to Taweret, every amulet tied around a wrist, every letter slipped into a tomb mouth became a rehearsal for the greater passage. For the Egyptians, the line between guarding life now and preparing for the afterlife was exceedingly thin, so that as we embark on this exploration of the soul's journey beyond the heart's weighing, we carry with us the sense that even the smallest act of piety might echo softly but enduringly in the world beyond.
That thin line between guarding life and preparing for the afterlife was not only patrolled by prayers and offerings, it was woven through with a power the Egyptians called Heka, a force they believed the gods had built into the very fabric of creation itself. For this ancient civilization, magic was not a fringe superstition, but a fundamental creative power, older even than the gods, through which the world had first been spoken into ordered being, and through which it was continually sustained. In this worldview, to practice Heka was to participate in a small and careful way in the same currents of power that had raised the primeval mound from the waters and set the sun on its daily path, so that healing, protection, and even resurrection were seen as extensions of cosmic order rather than violations of it. Egyptian mythology, in this sense, was a complex tapestry of precedents, stories in which the gods themselves had suffered wounds, poison, and danger, thereby establishing models that human healers could invoke when confronting illness and misfortune. On a quiet night in a village by the Nile, a child bitten by a scorpion might be carried to a priest or wise woman who would kneel beside the small, trembling body and begin to recite a spell in which the patient or the healer became Horus. In the myth, Horus, still a vulnerable child, is stung by a scorpion and lies near death until Isis, with desperate words and commanding magic, calls upon Ra and the assembled gods to restore him. By ritually identifying the suffering child with Horus and the healer with Isis, the spell did more than request aid. It reenacted the original healing, as if time folded and the ancient victory over poison could be made present again. This same logic extended into objects, into the quiet, gleaming forms of amulets that people wore in life and carried with them into the tomb. The eye of Horus, or Wedjat, did not simply represent an eye, it embodied the myth of Horus's eye torn out in his struggle with Set, then healed and made whole, becoming a symbol of restored integrity and protection. Scarab beetle amulets recalled Khepri, the morning sun god who rolled the solar disk across the sky, a promise of rebirth. Jed pillows evoked the backbone of Osiris, an axis of stability and endurance after death. Here we meet a pattern that continues to captivate us. The same Heka that soothed a snakebite could, in a different key, guard the soul from the serpents and demons of the Duat, the shadowed realm through which every deceased person must travel. A spell that once commanded desert winds to release their grip on a feverish body might, copied onto papyrus and placed in a coffin, become a passport through perilous gates, its ritual symbolism ensuring safe passage where unaided mortals would falter. Across 3 millennia, what remained constant was the conviction that mythic events were not locked in the past, but formed a living reality that could be touched through words, gestures, and sacred images. As we embark on this exploration of the soul's journey beyond death, we can pause for a pattern interrupt and turn gently inward for a moment, imagining your own body as a quiet temple,
your spine a jed pillar, your heartbeat a soft scarab rolling the sun of awareness across the inner sky, and each slow breath a small unspoken spell of protection as you drift further toward sleep. From that quiet inner temple, we can lift our gaze outward again toward the great stone temples that lined the Nile, where other hearts and other breaths once moved in disciplined unison, sustaining a whole civilization's conversation with the divine. Within those shadowed halls, Egyptian mythology was not a collection of simple stories, but a complex tapestry guarded and cultivated by a priestly class whose learning continues to captivate us. These priests were not merely performers of habit. They were learned specialists who memorized vast corpora of sacred texts, recited hymns that traced creation from the first dawn, and carried out intricate ritual sequences timed to the movements of the sun and stars. In the stillness before sunrise, they purified themselves with cool water, dressed the statues of the gods, lit incense, and spoke words that, in their understanding, renewed cosmic order itself. What remained constant was the conviction that correct ritual, grounded in understanding, helped keep the fragile balance between order and chaos. As we embark on this exploration of the temple's inner thought, we find that the gods themselves were understood in fluid, many-layered ways, far from naive literalism. The same divine reality might appear as a golden sun disk, a fierce falcon, or a humble scarab beetle pushing its luminous sphere across the sky, each image a different angle on a single ineffable power. Amun could merge with Ra, Ptah could be praised as mind and tongue of creation, and yet, beneath these shifting names and forms, priests spoke of a hidden unity that no single image could fully contain. In their hands, the great narratives of the Egyptian gods became more than tales of adventure. They were meditations on fundamental human concerns. The death and resurrection of Osiris could be read as a literal mythic history, as a ritual drama enacted in festivals, as an ethical pattern of injustice answered by eventual judgment, and as a metaphysical statement that life can arise again from what seems utterly broken. Ra's nightly journey through the Duat, reborn each morning, offered both a picture of the sun's motion and a model for the soul's passage through darkness toward renewed light, while Ma'at, with her feather of truth, linked the turning of the heavens to the smallest human decision. To think about death and the afterlife, these temple philosophers developed a remarkably subtle map of the person. They spoke of the Ka, the vital life force that needed offerings, the Ba, the mobile, personality-bearing aspect that could leave the tomb, the Akh, the transfigured, luminous being that might dwell among the stars, and alongside these, the enduring name and the fragile shadow, all woven into a single living reality that stretched across 3 millennia of belief. Death, in this view, was not a sharp end, but a dangerous transition in which these components had to be protected, reunited, and guided. Soon we will leave this high vantage point of doctrine and temple theology, and instead walk beside a single, unnamed Egyptian soul as it steps into the Duat, approaches the scales of Ma'at, and seeks to become an Akh in the field of reeds. For now, you might imagine that first quiet moment after burial, when the tomb door is sealed, the last footsteps fade, and in the darkness something within you stirs, realizing that the journey the priests described in whispers is about to begin.
So we linger for a moment in that sealed darkness, in the still air of the tomb, and we allow our eyes, here and now, to soften, as if they too were adjusting to that eternal night. For we are about to cross a threshold in our imagining, just as our anonymous Egyptian soul crosses one in its own reality of death and transformation. As we embark on this exploration of the duat, we step from explanation into experience, from abstract doctrine into a quiet, unfolding story. For the Egyptians, this story unfolded in a cosmos very different from the one many of us assume when we glance at the night sky or walk through our day. Because where modern habits of thought often see a vast but indifferent universe of particles and forces, the ancient world of the Nile was a living reality, filled with gods, spirits, and signs that could speak. A flicker of candlelight, the rustle of linen, the pattern of stars above the desert were not random. They were messages in a complex tapestry of meaning, in which ritual and symbolism bound human lives to cosmic order. Yet even as this worldview appears distant from a more disenchanted, materialist outlook, what remained constant was the set of fundamental human concerns that shaped it: anxiety about judgment, longing for justice, hope for reunion with family, the desire that one's name and story not simply vanish. The myths of Osiris and the journeys described in funerary texts did not float above daily life. They addressed the same quiet fears and fragile hopes that continue to captivate us when we contemplate our own mortality. To make this more than an abstraction, we will walk beside a single, composite soul drawn from countless burials across 3 millennia of Egyptian civilization. Perhaps a middle-ranking scribe from Thebes, whose careful hands once copied hymns to Ra and legal decrees for local officials. We will not give him a specific historical identity, but we will let him stand for the many whose hearts were weighed, whose bar-bird hovered above painted coffins, whose car awaited offerings in the cool shadow of tomb chapels. Through him, death, mummification, judgment, and afterlife become a continuous narrative rather than scattered beliefs. As we follow this scribe, our journey will unfold in layers. We will linger in the tomb where his bandaged body rests. We will accompany his bar through the duat, with its gates and guardians. We will stand in the hall of 2 truths as his heart approaches the scales of Ma'at, and we will gaze toward the shimmering field of reeds, where the righteous plow and harvest in an idealized Egypt. At each stage you will hear both the story itself and the symbolic meaning beneath it, how each spell, each god, each image on a coffin or papyrus map served as a guide through danger toward renewed order. As this narrative deepens, you may allow your own body to grow heavier and more still, mirroring the scribe's form lying on the funerary bed, wrapped and at rest, while your awareness, light as a bar with human head and bird's wings, drifts gently onward. Your breathing can settle into a slow, tidal rhythm, like the Nile at night, as we let the surface world recede and attend instead to this inner voyage. In the next moments, we will watch our scribe's final breath, hear the first ritual laments, and feel the quiet separation as body and soul begin to part. And with that parting, the long passage through the duat truly begins.
And so, as the last breath leaves our scribe's body and the house grows still, we can begin to see what the Egyptians believed was really happening beneath the silence. For in their mythology, a person was never a simple single thing, but a complex tapestry of visible and invisible parts woven together for a brief time. Death, in this view, is not a sudden erasure, but a careful unthreading. The first strand is the Ka, the vital life force, the invisible double that has shared every meal, every cup of beer, every quiet moment of work by lamplight. When the heart slows and the chest no longer rises, the Ka does not vanish, it separates, withdrawing from the limbs and organs it once animated, yet remaining hungry, still in need of nourishment. This is why, as we embark on this exploration of Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife, we find tomb chapels stocked with bread, beer, onions, and meat, and walls inscribed with spoken words and painted images, so that spoken words and painted images can continue to feed the Ka for eternity. Around these core elements gather two quieter yet crucial companions, the Ren, or name, and the shadow. The name is identity itself, spoken by family, carved in stone, recited in ritual. The shadow is the subtle imprint of presence, following body and soul alike. To erase a name from monuments, to chisel out a face, to mutilate a mummy, was to inflict a second, more terrible death, cutting the ties that allowed the Ka and Ba to find one another and to endure in memory. Suddenly, the familiar images of mummies, sarcophagi, and painted coffins shift from curiosities to necessities, a pattern interrupt in how we usually see this mythology. The entire machinery of mummification, tomb construction, and funerary texts exists to keep these parts of the person connected, protected, and properly guided, so that, step by step through the duat, our scribe may pass from fragile separation into the stable brilliance of an Ach. In the next stage of our journey, we will follow those steps more closely, moving with him through gates and caverns toward the hole where his heart will be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. And so, as we leave the abstract map of Ka, Ba, and Ach, we find ourselves in a single room in Thebes, where those ideas become a living reality for one human being. The Nile is not far, its evening breeze moving the linen curtain, and in a modest but comfortable house, lit by a small oil lamp, an aging scribe lies upon his wooden bed, surrounded by the quiet murmur of family and the watchful eyes of household gods painted on clay. He has spent his life with reed pen and palette, copying hymns to Ra and Osiris, recording accounts for the temple granaries, inscribing the very spells that describe the journey he is about to take. Now his final illness has settled into his chest like a slow, heavy weight. His wife moistens his lips with water poured respectfully from a jar dedicated to Hathor. His eldest son adjusts the amulet of Bes that hangs near the headrest, and small figurines of protective gods look on, reminders that Egyptian mythology was never distant theory, but part of the furniture of the home. The moment of death in this civilization that continues to captivate us is not a violent rupture, but a measured transition. His breath, once steady as the inundation, begins to lengthen, then shorten, the pauses between each exhale widening like stretches of desert between fertile fields. Conversation fades, the room grows very still. When the last breath slips out, it is almost unnoticed, a sigh that could have been sleep. Yet within that quiet instant, the complex tapestry of his person begins to separate. The car drawing back from the cooling flesh, the bar loosening like a bird testing its wings. Around the bed, the response is immediate and deeply patterned by ritual. His wife gives a practiced, piercing wail that breaks, then softens into sobbing. His daughters beat their breasts and sprinkle dust in their hair. A neighbor hurries to summon the embalmers, for the body must not be neglected. Already the first prayers change their grammar, addressing him not as one who rests here, but as one who goes forth by day, one who walks now on a path beyond their reach towards judgment and the afterlife promised across 3 millennia of belief. From another perspective, invisible yet no less real, the newly freed bar hovers above the bed, bewildered and lucid at once. It sees the stillness of its own face, the careful closing of the eyes, the amulet of the Eye of Horus laid upon the chest, and remembers, like a student recalling a well-studied text, that certain words must be spoken, certain gestures completed, if it should navigate the duat in safety. As we embark on this exploration of his passage, we can sense how these ancient beliefs spoke to fundamental human concerns about continuity, identity, and cosmic order. He is gone, yet not gone, present, yet already addressed as Osiris, as one aligned with the god of resurrection. The embalmers must arrive in time, the organs must be preserved, the linen must embrace the limbs in careful layers. A tomb space must be readied, even if small, its walls prepared to receive images of fields, boats, and offerings, its niches ready for food and drink. Most crucial of all, the necessary words must be inscribed, spells to open gates, names of guardians, affirmations of innocence before the scales. Without preservation of the body, without a place for offerings, without the written guidance of the Book of the Dead, his journey will falter before it truly begins. And in the darkness beyond this quiet house, something patient is already waiting to test the weight of his heart.
And so, while the quiet house of purification waits, and the patient darkness beyond prepares its test, we follow the body itself as it is led away, carried on a wooden bier through narrow streets toward the embalming place, where desert air is dry and clean, and where the most intimate work of Egyptian mythology unfolds upon human flesh. Here, death is not an end, but a workshop of transformation, a living reality in which artisans, priests, and gods collaborate. The body is first washed in water drawn from the Nile, that same river of creation whose annual flood renewed the land, and this gentle cleansing is both practical and symbolic, rinsing away dust and impurity while restoring a memory of the first waters from which the world emerged. Then, with solemn precision, the embalmers make a small incision in the left flank, and one by one the organs are removed, each treated as a sacred object rather than discarded refuse.
The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines are dried and placed into canopic jars, guarded by the 4 sons of Horus, themselves sheltered by protective goddesses, so that even within clay and stone the person remains under divine care. Next comes the long stillness of drying, as natron, the desert's crystalline salt, draws moisture from the body, turning fragile flesh into something stable enough to endure across 3 millennia of sand and silence. Yet what remained constant was the understanding that this was not mere preservation, it was an act of theology, affirming that the body is a vessel the Ka and Ba will need again. When the natron is removed, priests anoint the skin with fragrant oils and resins, substances that both protect and perfume, while layer after layer of linen is wrapped around limbs and torso, each strip a quiet affirmation that the fragmented person is being reassembled, sanctified, and prepared for judgment and rebirth. Between these layers, small amulets are placed with deliberate care, turning the wrappings into a complex tapestry of protection and prayer. A heart scarab rests over the chest, inscribed with words asking the heart not to betray its owner in the hall of Ma'at, where it will be weighed against the feather of cosmic order. Along the spine, jed pillar amulets evoke the backbone of Osiris, granting stability and endurance, while the eye of Horus is laid near any incision or vulnerable place, its curving lines a promise of healing and completeness in the duat. As we embark on this exploration of the soul's journey, you might allow yourself to imagine your own body wrapped in soft, weightless layers of quiet, each slow breath another band of linen, each exhale a gentle blessing, until, like our Egyptian companion, we are ready to follow the hidden path into the tomb and beyond, where the next chapter of this profound wisdom awaits. And so, having wrapped our imagined body in quiet linen and stepped across the threshold of death, we now find ourselves standing at the mouth of the tomb, where stone, paint, and ink become guides for a journey no living feet will walk, yet every Egyptian heart expected to take. As we embark on this exploration of the tomb itself, we enter not merely a chamber of bones, but a carefully designed time capsule, a map of the cosmos carved into the earth. In the New Kingdom, a typical rock-cut tomb unfolds like a slow descent into the underworld. First, the outer entrance and courtyard, where the living might gather, speak the name of the dead, and leave offerings that nourished the Ka, the life force that continues to captivate us with its quiet persistence. Beyond this lies the offering chapel, often with a false door, a liminal surface through which the deceased could symbolically pass to receive bread, beer, and incense. Then the corridors slope inward and downward, sometimes turning, sometimes straight, their very geometry echoing the passage from sunlight into the hidden duat, until at last we reach the burial chamber, womb-like and enclosed, where coffin and sarcophagus rest at the axis between earth and sky. On these walls, darkness is gently defeated by color. Scenes of daily life unfold in calm, ordered registers, fields of grain being harvested, nets drawing fish from the Nile, servants preparing food, musicians playing before the tomb owner, all rendered with precision that turns memory into ritual. For the Egyptians, this was not nostalgic decoration, but living reality. By depicting idealized work and abundance, they believed these activities would magically continue in the afterlife, ensuring that the dead would plow perfect furrows, reap unending harvests, and feast without lack in the field of reeds. Interwoven with these domestic scenes are more overtly mythological images, underworld boats gliding through star-strewn waters, serpents and guardian deities flanking doorways, and in more elite tombs, vignettes from underworld books that trace Ra's nightly voyage. This complex tapestry of images functioned as both reassurance and warning, teaching the soul what terrors to expect and what allies among the gods might offer protection, so that cosmic order could be maintained even in the realm of shadows. Within the coffin, another guide waits, a papyrus roll we call the Book of the Dead, though the Egyptians knew it simply as spells for going forth by day. Selected according to family means and personal preference, its chapters contain spells, passwords, hymns, and miniature maps showing gates, lakes of fire, and fearsome guardians. There, too, we often find the famous weighing of the heart, the tiny painted heart resting on scales against the feather of Ma'at, while Anubis adjusts the balance and Thoth records the verdict, embodying the profound wisdom of judgment that addressed fundamental human concerns about justice, truth, and the possibility of renewal. Across the coffin boards and along the tomb walls, inscriptions suddenly speak in the first person, as if the dead themselves were rehearsing their lines for a cosmic drama. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I know the names of the gods at the gates. These are the so-called negative confessions and declarations of knowledge, carefully memorized in stone so they would not be forgotten in the bewildering halls of Osiris. What remained constant was the conviction that correct words, spoken in harmony with Ma'at, could open any door. At last, the rituals are complete. The family withdraws, stones grind into place as the tomb is sealed, and a darkness older than memory settles over painted fields and silent spells. Yet within that stillness, the scribe's bar, that bird-bodied, human-headed aspect of personality, stirs for its first true departure, slipping from the bandaged form and following the sun's invisible path into the unseen lands of the duat, where, in the next movement of this mythology, judgment and transformation await.
And so, as the tomb falls utterly silent, we find ourselves poised at a threshold. For in Egyptian beliefs, death is not an abrupt extinguishing, but a carefully orchestrated crossing, a movement from the bright lands of day into a more hidden, interior geography of the cosmos. The western horizon, where the sun appeared to sink into the desert each evening, becomes our compass, and we follow it now with the scribe's bar, that fluttering, aware presence that has just loosened itself from linen and flesh. Outside, in the imagined world above, the sun of Ra leans toward evening, its light lengthening over the fields, then reddening over the sand, until it touches the distant line of the west with a final burning clarity. For the Egyptians, this was not mere sunset, but the opening of a gate, the moment when the solar bark slipped beneath the visible world and began its nightly descent into the duat, the underworld.
Our scribe's bar aligns itself with that movement as we embark on this exploration of an invisible landscape that continues to captivate us because it joined cosmic order to the most fundamental human concerns about mortality and renewal. The duat is not a single cavern or a simple pit of punishment. It is a complex tapestry of regions and passages, a shadowy mirror of Egypt itself, transformed into mythic space. There are rivers that resemble the Nile, yet flow through darkness, caverns whose ceilings drip with stars, islands of flame, and long corridors broken by gates. In these spaces move the gods and countless spirits, Ra on his bark, Osiris enthroned in the deep, Anubis guiding the dead, and alongside them fearsome guardians with knives, serpents coiled around pillars, and hybrid beings whose very forms are tests of perception and courage. To journey here is to submit to examination. The duat is a testing ground and a corridor rather than a final destination, a realm where the deceased must demonstrate knowledge, moral character, and proper ritual preparation in order to pass. What remained constant was the conviction that safe passage depended on harmony with Maat, that principle of truth and balance, and on knowing how to address each region and each being encountered. The soul is not merely acted upon, it participates, answers, remembers. For our scribe, this participation draws directly from the careful work he oversaw in life. The spells painted on his tomb walls, the lines of the so-called Book of the Dead written on papyrus, the images of boats, gates, and protective deities are not decorative illustrations, but functional tools. Each recited formula is a key that unlocks a door or silences a hostile serpent. Each remembered picture a map that orients him in twisting corridors. Each divine name a password that transforms a threatening guardian into a neutral or even helpful presence. In this way, mythology becomes a living reality, a kind of sacred technology for navigating the afterlife. Ahead, the darkness begins to organize itself into structure, a looming portal flanked by towering figures whose heads are animal, human, and something in between. Their names are strange to our ears, their shapes unsettling, and they are poised to ask questions only the prepared can answer. At the very first gate of the duat, the journey truly begins, and the scribe's next words, or his silence, will decide whether that gate opens or remains forever closed. The first gate stands before him like a horizon made solid, and beyond it the dark river of night bends away into unseen caverns, where the bark of Ra is even now entering the duat with its radiant cargo of gods and blessed dead. In some versions of this mythology, our scribe's bar rises like a small luminous bird to join that solar company directly. In others, it travels on a parallel course, guided by the same currents of cosmic order, listening for the distant splash of Ra's oars as reassurance that the cycle of creation continues. Egyptian priests imagined the duat not as a single open plain, but a sequence of regions, caverns, and gates, each marked by doors, pylons, or narrow passages that constrict the soul's movement and focus its attention. At every threshold, guardians wait, sometimes 3, sometimes 7, with each a name, a title, and a demand, and the funerary texts function as careful scripts for these encounters, preserving the exact phrases the deceased must speak. The traveler must say, "I know you," followed by the guardian's hidden name, or recite, "I know that gate, I know that town, I know that lake," until the landscape itself becomes a recitation. Here, knowledge is not abstract information, but a living reality, a way of aligning one's identity with the ordered structure of the cosmos, and what remained constant was the conviction that to know truly is to survive. As we embark on this exploration of gates and guardians, the emphasis on names may seem strange, yet for the Egyptian imagination, to utter the true name of a being or a place was to affirm its position within Maat, to draw it out of chaos and into intelligible pattern. Each successful answer is a small act of creation, echoing Ptah's shaping of the world through thought and speech, and each failure risks slipping back towards formlessness. The guardians themselves are vivid, but in this context they are more symbolic challenge than horror. One may be a towering serpent whose coils encircle a doorway, its eyes pools of fire that test whether the traveler is blinded by fear or steady in purpose. Another is a composite creature, human torso, lion legs, crocodile jaws, embodying the wild, untamed forces that surround the narrow path of order. There are lakes whose surfaces burn like oil, islands edged with knives, and caverns where dismemberment or oblivion await those who cannot name and thus cannot claim their place in the cosmic design. At every stage, the scribe's preserved words shield him. He speaks the names written in careful columns beside his painted image, and the guardians stand aside, acknowledging a fellow participant in the complex tapestry of divine and human speech. Egyptian mythology continues to captivate us here because it treats language as a bridge across the most fundamental human concerns, turning passwords and remembered lines into tools for safe passage. And here we might pause for a gentle pattern interrupt and invite you, as you lie in the quiet of your own room, to notice the small phrases you carry as keys. Your childhood address, a loved one's phone number, a memorized prayer or song, the PIN codes and passwords that unlock your devices. These modern sequences of numbers and words are distant echoes of that older conviction that the right utterance at the right moment opens the way and keeps danger at bay. In the next chambers of the duat, the guardians will grow stranger, the questions more searching, and the scribe's moral alignment with Maat will matter as much as his memory, for some gates will not yield to knowledge alone.
In that deepening sequence of gates and questions, something else is stirring beyond the individual traveler. For above the hidden corridors of the duat, another voyage is underway, one that involves every being in the Egyptian cosmos. As we embark on this exploration of the night, we rise for a moment out of the scribe's narrow passage and look outward to the great solar bark of Ra, slipping beneath the western horizon as your own thoughts begin to dim and loosen. For the Egyptians, sunset was not simply a pretty sky. It was the visible sign that the sun god had entered the first hour of the duat, attended by a retinue of gods, blessed dead, and protective spirits. In the earliest hours, the bark glides through cavernous tunnels and along subterranean rivers, the crew reciting spells that are cousins to the formulas we have just heard, while serpents, crocodile-headed beings, and fiery guardians bow or retreat before the divine light. We are watching a cosmic ritual unfold, a complex tapestry of deities and forces, all choreographed to keep the fragile balance of order intact. As the hours pass, the dangers sharpen. In the middle of the night, when human sleep sinks towards its deepest point, Ra's enemies gather most fiercely, and the serpent Apophis, embodiment of chaos, rises from the dark waters to coil around the solar bark and halt its motion. Priests on earth once joined this scene with their own nocturnal rites, cursing and stabbing wax effigies of the serpent, convinced that their actions were part of a living reality that helped the sun break free. What remained constant was the conviction that the universe itself depended on this struggle being won again and again. Each dawn, when Ra emerged renewed on the eastern horizon, it was proof that the attack had failed, that order had once more triumphed over chaos, and that the pattern of creation still held. Across 3 millennia of Egyptian civilization, through political upheavals and shifting dynasties, this daily reassurance continues to captivate us. The idea that the world is not guaranteed, but maintained, that light returns because countless seen and unseen allies preserve it. In this rhythm, Egyptians found profound wisdom about resilience, repetition, and the possibility that the human soul might share in the sun's victorious return. Our anonymous scribe, clutching his Book of the Dead, hopes for precisely this alignment. By speaking the names of the gods who crew Ra's bark, by identifying himself as a servant of Maat and an enemy of Apophis, he seeks not merely to pass tests, but to be taken aboard, to be carried with the sun through the perilous hours, and rise with him into a renewed day. The afterlife in this vision is not a static reward, but a participation in a cosmic cycle, a shared voyage that binds human destiny to the path of a god. As you drift further into sleep, your own awareness follows a quieter version of this descent. The bright, busy surface of consciousness fades, thoughts lengthen and dissolve, and yet beneath them a deeper rhythm carries you, regulating breath and heartbeat, knitting memory and restoring strength. You do not control this hidden journey, but you trust it, just as Egyptians trusted that beyond their sight, Ra's bark continued its course through shadowed caverns. Ahead, both for our scribe and for us as listeners, the landscape of the duat will open into a place of stillness rather than motion, where the noise of serpents and rushing waters gives way to a measured, judicial calm. Beyond the shifting tunnels and the serpent's coils waits a luminous hall lined with gods and scales of justice, the hall of two truths, where every heart must pause and be weighed before any new dawn can truly begin. Approaching the scales, the hall of two truths revealed. And now, as the last echoes of serpents and rushing waters fade behind us, we find ourselves approaching that luminous stillness the Egyptians feared and longed for in equal measure, the place where movement gives way to judgment, and where the soul must stand revealed. Before us, the hall of two truths opens like a vast, deliberate breath in the fabric of the duat. The space is immense yet perfectly ordered, its boundaries unclear, as though its walls are made of intention rather than stone, bathed in a steady, unreal light that comes from no visible torch or sun.
Along its sides, in precise rows, sit the gods and goddesses of Egyptian mythology, each a witness to the moment that decides an eternity. Lion-headed and falcon-headed, human-faced and serpentine, embodiments of forces that shaped creation and maintained cosmic order across 3 millennia of Egyptian civilization. This is not a distant legend, but for this ancient civilization a living reality, rehearsed on tomb walls and in whispered funerary ritual. As we embark on this exploration of judgment, our attention is drawn to the far end of the hall, where the presiding figure of Osiris sits enthroned. He is wrapped tightly like a mummy, bound in the linens that once enclosed dead kings, yet his skin is a deep verdant green, the color of new plants after the Nile's inundation, a quiet proclamation of rebirth. Upon his head rests the tall white crown flanked by plumes, and in his crossed hands he holds crook and flail, symbols of guidance and authority. At his sides stand Isis and Nephthys, sisters and mourners, guardians and magicians, their presence reminding us that even in judgment, compassion and lament are woven into the complex tapestry of divine power. Closer to where we stand, the scene becomes more intimate. Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of the necropolis, approaches with unhurried steps, his black fur gleaming softly in the otherworldly light. He is calm, composed, a psychopomp who has walked this path with countless souls, and now he guides you, the anonymous scribe, toward the center of the hall. Beside the scales waits Thoth, ibis-headed scribe of the gods, palette and reed pen in hand, prepared to record with unerring precision whatever truth is revealed here, for nothing spoken or concealed escapes his careful accounting. The Egyptians called this hall the Two Truths because in their beliefs 2 dimensions of reality meet here and must align. There is the truth of how one actually lived, carried in the heart with all its memories, intentions, and quiet compromises. And there is the higher cosmic truth of Maat, the ideal of balance, justice, and right order that structured both society and the stars. In life, these truths might drift apart. Here, under the gaze of the gods, they are brought into perfect, inexorable clarity. At the very center of the hall stands the great balance, gleaming with an almost surgical purity, one pan prepared for the heart, and the other for the feather of Maat, light as breath, yet heavy with profound wisdom. Anubis gestures toward it, Thoth's pen hovers over his tablet, and the assembled court leans into a silence so complete it seems to press against the skin. The moment of weighing is near. The heart has not yet been placed, the feather has not yet settled, and in this suspended instant between 2 truths, everything that follows still hangs undecided.
In that held breath of the divine courtroom, we are invited to look more closely at the very thing about to be weighed, because for the Egyptians the heart was not a simple organ of flesh, but the the inner archive of a life, the seat of memory, conscience, intention, and personality, the part of you that could not forget what you had done, even if your waking mind tried to. The brain, strangely to us, was of little consequence, and was often removed during mummification, but the heart was left carefully in place, preserved within the chest, because it would speak on your behalf when words alone were no longer enough. As we embark on this exploration of judgment, we watch Anubis step forward with ritual precision, his jackal face unreadable, his hands steady as he lifts the small stylized heart of our anonymous scribe and places it on one pan of the golden scales. On the other pan, he sets the feather of Ma'at, pure white, impossibly light, the distilled symbolism of truth, balance, and right order in the cosmos and in the human community. Thoth, ibis-headed scribe of the gods, leans in with his palette and reed pen, ready to record even the slightest tremor in the balance, for in this mythology no detail of the moral life is too small to matter. Yet before the scales settle, there is speech. The deceased must face not only Osiris, but also a panel of 42 assessor deities, each linked to a specific region and a specific domain of behavior, and offer what modern scholars call the negative confession or declaration of innocence. One by one, in a litany that continues to captivate us across 3 millennia, the soul proclaims, "I have not stolen, I have not murdered, I have not caused pain, I have not diminished the offerings of the gods, I have not polluted the Nile," moving through the complex tapestry of social, legal, and religious obligations that structured Egyptian civilization. This was ethics spoken as prayer, morality articulated as a living reality before divine witnesses. Only then does silence return, and the gaze of the court falls again upon the scales. Beneath them waits a figure of concentrated dread and precise symbolism, Ammit, the devourer, with crocodile jaws, lion forequarters, and hippopotamus hindquarters, a composite of the most dangerous creatures of the Nile. If the heart proves heavier than the feather, burdened by falsehood and imbalance, Ammit will consume it, and with that single bite, the possibility of eternal life ends, not in fiery torment, but in unbeing, in the erasure of name and memory. Yet we should not imagine this as a cruel cosmic lottery. For Egyptians, judgment was demanding but not arbitrary. What remained constant was the conviction that a life lived in accordance with Ma'at, supported by proper ritual, offerings, and remembrance, could render the heart light enough to pass. The Book of the Dead even offered spells to help the heart not stand against its owner, suggesting a nuanced awareness of human frailty. As we move deeper into the afterlife landscape, we will see what awaited the vindicated soul once the feather and the heart finally came into perfect, trembling balance. And now, in that charged, expectant silence after petition and spell, we arrive at the moment the Egyptians feared and hoped for in equal measure, the instant when the scales finally come to rest. Around us, the tribunal of gods is utterly still. Even the torches along the hall of judgment seem to burn without flicker, as if the entire cosmic order were holding its breath alongside you. Before us, the beam of the great balance quivers, then settles into a delicate, trembling equilibrium. In the pan on one side lies the small, glistening feather of Ma'at, emblem of truth, justice, and right order. In the other rests the heart of our anonymous scribe, the seat of memory and intention. The pointer aligns, neither plunging downward in guilt nor springing upward in impossible perfection, but hovering in a poised, almost weightless accord. In some recitations, the ideal heart rises ever so slightly, suggesting not sinlessness, but a life lived largely in harmony with Ma'at. Anubis, patient guardian of the dead, steps back from the mechanism, his jackal profile turned toward the assembled court. while Amit, the devourer, shifts restlessly and then grows still, denied her meal. It is Thoth, ibis-headed scribe of the gods and master of sacred writing, who now advances, reed pen and palette in hand. In this mythology, he is not merely a recorder, but a cosmic arbiter, his words themselves instruments of creation and decision. He inspects the scales, consults the divine ledger, and proclaims in a clear, resonant voice that seems to echo through stone and darkness alike, "This man is Ma-Heru, true of voice, justified." With that pronouncement, our scribe is no longer a trembling candidate for oblivion, but one who may enter the company of the blessed dead. The verdict is not an abstraction, it is a transformation, a shift in being as profound as birth. Here, Egyptian beliefs about the soul unfold as a complex tapestry. The Ka, the vital double sustained by offerings, and the Ba, the mobile bird-like personality that had wandered through tomb and duat, now stand on the threshold of integration. Through proper ritual, correct names, and this successful judgment, they may unite into the Ach, a transfigured state that continues to captivate us when we think about what it means to persist beyond death. The Ach is luminous, effective, a shining presence able to move freely between realms, to join the solar bark of Ra by night and return to the tomb or the living by day, no longer vulnerable in the same way as before. As we embark on this exploration of Egyptian morality, we see that ethics were not merely social conventions, but woven into the very structure of the cosmos. To act justly, to refrain from needless harm, to honor contracts and care for the weak, was to participate in Ma'at, to keep one's heart light for this decisive weighing. What remained constant was the conviction that every choice left an imprint, that truth and falsehood accumulated as real, measurable weight. In this way, the judgment scene speaks to fundamental human concerns, our longing for justice, our fear of being finally known, our hope that sincere effort might be enough. In the Egyptian beliefs, the gods, the scales, and the heart itself conspired to reveal who a person had become across 3 millennia of continuous civilization. Now our scribe, declared true of voice, turns from the hall of Osiris toward the horizon beyond death, where reeds whisper in an eternal breeze and canals gleam like polished faience. Ahead lies the field of reeds, an idealized Egypt restored to perfect balance. What does such a paradise look like, and what work, what joy might one undertake there forever? In the quiet that follows judgment, the scene opens not onto a distant alien heaven, but onto a landscape that feels uncannily familiar, as if the Nile Valley itself had been cleansed of every hardship and left only with its beauty. Here, in the field of reeds, canals run straight and clear beneath a soft, unbroken light. Reeds murmur along the banks, and palm groves cast patterned shade upon fields that are always ready for harvest, never scorched, never drowned.
Egyptian mythology stands as a complex tapestry of images like this, in which the afterlife is not an escape from the world, but its perfection, its restoration to ma'at, to right order. The blessed dead walk along raised dikes between shining waterways, guiding ploughs through dark, fertile soil that never clings, never exhausts, never fails to yield. The same activities that once demanded sweat and vigilance, farming, fishing, tending animals, continue here as a calm, meaningful rhythm, work transfigured into gentle ritual, with no scarcity, no anxiety about flood or famine, only the deep reassurance that the cycle of creation will never again be broken. Yet this serenity did not mean endless toil. In many tombs, the ancient Egyptians placed small, carefully inscribed figures called shabti, carved from faience, wood, or stone, each one a miniature servant poised to answer a roll call in the afterlife. Texts address them directly. If the deceased is summoned to perform labor in the field of reeds, the shabti is commanded to reply, "Here I am," and to take up the burden in their place. Through this quiet piece of symbolism, we glimpse a civilization that honored work but also dreamed of rest, that imagined responsibility shared and softened by magic, not abolished. The field of reeds is also a social and devotional space, not a solitary dream. Family lines broken by death are woven together again. Parents, children, and friends meet on the riverbanks and in the shade of sycamores, their names secure, their voices recognized. The gods themselves are present as a living reality. One might join the retinue of Osiris, attending the green-skinned lord in his court among the fields, or take one's place among the crew of Ra's solar bark, sailing each night through the duat and each dawn into the renewed day, participating forever in the cosmic struggle to uphold order against chaos. And then, almost unexpectedly, this ancient vision turns towards us. As we embark on this exploration of paradise, we are invited to ask not only what the Egyptians hoped for, but what remained constant was the longing beneath their beliefs. If you were to shape your own field of reeds, what landscape would unfold around you? Mountains, sea, forest, or a quiet garden at dusk, and what simple repeating tasks would feel restful rather than wearying. As we continue, we will see how this ideal of balanced eternity reflects fundamental human concerns about meaning, memory, and the desire for a world finally set right. And yet, as we continue from that quiet field of reeds you imagined, we find that Egyptian mythology did not confine the blessed dead to a single landscape, but unfolded a complex tapestry of destinations, forms, and modes of being, each illuminating a different facet of the mystery of survival beyond death. Alongside the green fields and shining canals, another vision awaited the justified, a sky of unsetting lights. High above the Nile Valley, where the night canopy seemed to arch close over desert and temple, the Egyptians watched the circumpolar stars, the ones that never dipped below the horizon, and saw in them an image of unending endurance. In pyramid texts carved deep within royal tombs, the dead king is promised a place among these imperishable ones, joining a cosmic company that circles forever without falling into darkness. Here the afterlife is not a field, but a firmament, not harvest, but orbit, yet the underlying symbolism is the same: To be justified is to enter a living reality of stability and radiant ordered motion, yet the underlying symbolism is the same. At the same time, Egyptian beliefs insisted that death did not mean total separation from the familiar world. The Ba, that mobile, winged aspect of personhood, often shown as a human-headed bird, could leave the tomb by day, visiting the sunlight, the family house, the bustling streets, even the temple courts, then return to the mummy at night, like a migratory soul coming home. Funerary texts speak almost tenderly of opening the tomb for the Ba, of allowing it to go forth by day, sustained not only by bread and beer and incense, but by the written and spoken name, that delicate thread of identity that had to be preserved across 3 millennia of dynasties and change. Within the stone chapels of tombs and the shadowed halls of temples, another possibility unfolded. Statues and painted images were not mere decoration. They were receptacles, crafted with care so that the deceased could inhabit them, receiving offerings and hearing prayers. When a son poured water before his father's statue, or a priest recited a formula before the image of a long-dead official, the boundary between living and dead thinned, and ritual turned carved stone into a point of contact. Here the afterlife was neither distant star nor far-off field, but a presence seated in the very spaces of the living civilization. As we embark on this exploration of Egyptian afterlife symbolism, we see that barks sailing with Ra, stars circling the pole, statues waiting in chapels, and fields ripening under an eternal sun are not mutually exclusive heavens, but overlapping metaphors for different dimensions of becoming an Ak, an effective luminous spirit. What remained constant was the conviction that a just life, aligned with Ma'at and confirmed in judgment, opened into multiple interwoven modes of existence, all grounded in cosmic order and sustained by memory, name, and ritual. While the blessed dead thus enjoyed their many homes beyond death, a quieter question rises around them like desert wind at dusk. What became of the civilization that crafted this intricate vision, and how did Egypt itself pass into history and seek its own strange afterlife in the memory of the world?
Egypt itself, which once imagined the souls of its kings sailing with Ra and dwelling with Osiris, also faced its own long dusk, when temples dimmed, gods withdrew, and an entire religious world slipped beneath the horizon of memory. As we embark on this exploration of Egypt's final earthly centuries, we find that even the mythology of death and judgment was not spared the slow, quiet work of historical change. Under Roman rule, and then under the rising power of Christianity, the great stone temples that had been a living reality of Egyptian civilization for so long began to fall silent. Priests who once recited hymns at dawn, swung incense before gilded barks, and renewed cosmic order through daily ritual, gradually lost imperial support, legal protection, and finally the right to sacrifice at all. One by one, sanctuaries at Philae, Dendera, and Edfu ceased their offerings, until in the 4th and 5th centuries the last official cults were suppressed, and the old gods were formally dismissed from public life. The stone did not crumble at once, but the language inscribed upon it did. Hieroglyphic inscriptions which had carried prayers for the dead and spells for the afterlife across 3 millennia dwindled to a few stubborn, pious texts carved in remote sanctuaries, then stopped altogether.
What remained constant was the desert wind, the slow drifting sand, and walls covered with figures of Osiris, Anubis, and the weighing of the heart, now unreadable even to those who lived in their shadow. For later pilgrims, conquerors, and travelers, these scenes became a mute mythology, beautiful, alien pictures whose symbolism was felt but not truly known. For more than 1,000 years, the Egyptian language, in its ancient forms, slept, and with it the precise meanings of the pyramid texts, the Coffin Texts, and the Book of the Dead. Tomb paintings showing the heart poised on scales against the feather of Maat, or the deceased sailing in the solar bark, were admired, copied, and speculated upon, but the voices behind them were hushed. The profound wisdom of their spells, their careful instructions for passing gates and guardians in the Duat, lay sealed like a sarcophagus whose key had been lost. Then, in the 19th century, a different kind of ritual unfolded, not in a temple court, but in the study of scholars. Using the Rosetta Stone and painstaking comparison, Jean-François Champollion and others deciphered hieroglyphs, and in doing so performed a kind of linguistic resurrection. Suddenly, the dead could speak again. Priests, scribes, and ordinary believers addressed us across the ages, describing their beliefs about judgment, afterlife, and cosmic order in their own words. What had been mysterious images became a complex tapestry of prayers, spells, and reflections on fundamental human concerns. From that moment, Egyptian death philosophy itself entered an unusual afterlife. It inspired esoteric societies that saw in Osiris a hidden key to rebirth, fascinated artists and poets who filled their work with pyramids, mummies, and starlit processions of the gods, and even shaped popular tales of curses and haunted tombs that, though distorted, show how deeply this mythology continues to captivate us. As you listen tonight, drifting toward sleep, you too join this cultural afterlife. By letting these ancient beliefs pass once more through a human mind, you briefly revive a way of thinking in which death is a passage, judgment a weighing of the heart, and the night itself a journey toward some farther shore we have yet to see. In this quiet space between waking and sleep, we can begin to gather together the threads of this Egyptian vision and see not only strange gods and elaborate tombs, but a way of facing death that still speaks to fundamental human concerns. Egyptian mythology was never only about the distant past or a remote afterlife. It was a living reality, a pattern of order and meaning that stretched from the first breath to the last, and then beyond the grave into regions the sun itself traversed each night. At the center of this pattern stood Maat, not merely a goddess with a feather on her head, but the very fabric of reality, truth, justice, and balance woven into the structure of the cosmos. For the Egyptians, Maat was as real as the Nile flood and the rising sun, a cosmic order that governed the creation of the world, the judgments of the afterlife, and the smallest act of daily ritual. To speak honestly, to weigh fairly, to respect proper boundaries was not optional virtue. It was alignment with the way things are, a quiet participation in the same principle that kept the sky arched over the earth and the stars in their courses. As we embark on this exploration of their deepest intuitions, we find that trust in cycles lies just as close to the heart of the civilization. Night gives way to dawn, drought to inundation, and the darkness of the tomb to a hoped-for rebirth among the stars or in the shining field of reeds. Ra's boat disappears in the west only to emerge renewed in the east, and Osiris is killed only to become lord of the afterlife.
Across 3 millennia of changing dynasties and shifting cults, what remained constant was this confidence that decline is not the final word, that endings fold back into beginnings in a complex tapestry of loss and renewal. Within this framework, the weighing of the heart becomes an ethical mirror held up to every life. The scene is familiar now: Anubis tending the scales, Thoth recording, the feather of Maat poised in perfect stillness, and the heart of the deceased set against it. Every action, every word, every unspoken intention contributes, grain by grain, to the lightness or heaviness of that heart. There is no random decree, no arbitrary favor from the gods. The afterlife reveals what has quietly been forming all along. Yet the Egyptians did not meet this judgment with helpless terror. They prepared. Tombs were carved and painted, coffins inscribed, mummification performed with meticulous care, and texts like the Book of the Dead commissioned as guides through the Duat, turning fear into ordered readiness. To live in accordance with Maat, to rehearse the negative confession in life, to provide for one's ka and name, was to practice the courage to die, knowing that one had done what could be done. Gently, without insisting, we might ask which elements of this worldview could support our own peace of mind. Perhaps it is the sense that order, however fragile, is real, that preparation, however simple, is meaningful, that cycles, however mysterious, continue to carry us through nights we do not yet understand.
And so, as that ancient world-view settles around us like cool night air over the river, we can begin to step back from the detailed corridors of the Duat and let the journey soften into something simpler, quieter, closer to where you are now, lying here in the dark. We have walked in imagination from the banks of the Nile to the sealed tomb, from the painted coffin to the star-lit caverns beneath the earth, and we have emerged again into light. We have followed the Egyptian soul from the first closing of the tomb door, past gates and guardians, on to the solar bark beside Ra, through regions of fire and still water, until at last we stood with Osiris in the Hall of Two Truths, watching the scales. We have seen the heart placed opposite the feather of Maat, with Anubis adjusting the beam and Thoth recording the outcome, and we have stepped beyond that moment into the green, shimmering field of reeds, and further still into the quiet brilliance of the stars. Now, as we embark on this exploration of your own inner night, we are not rehearsing a literal judgment, nor summoning a fear of punishment, but receiving a metaphor that continues to captivate us because it speaks to fundamental human concerns. You might imagine your own heart not as an organ of flesh, but as the weight of this day, its unfinished tasks, its missteps, its small kindnesses and quiet efforts, resting gently on one side of an invisible scale. On the other side, picture a single feather, pale and luminous, resting in perfect stillness. If your heart were placed beside it tonight, what might you allow to fall away so that it could rise? An old self-accusation, a replayed conversation, a standard you could not meet. And what modest, unboastful virtues might help it grow light? The patience you showed when no one noticed, the restraint that kept a harsh word unspoken, the simple fact that you endured. Here we can let the rich, complex tapestry of Egyptian mythology become a quiet personal ritual of release. As we breathe, the charged images we have gathered begin to blur at their edges. The duat becomes not a map, but a feeling of passage. The whole of two truths becomes a moment of inner balance. The field of reeds becomes a soft, open space in which you may rest without demand. Around these images we place the reassuring rhythm of the cosmos that shaped this ancient civilization. Just as Ra descends each evening into the underworld and rises again at dawn, your own descent into sleep is part of a larger dependable order, a living reality that has carried human beings through 3 millennia of nights. You are not falling into emptiness, you are joining a pattern that has held countless generations, a cosmic ebb and flow of light and dark, waking and dreaming. So we begin to repeat rather than add. Still water, holding the reflection of distant stars, soft linen drawn close around a resting body, balanced scales, motionless in the half-light, a sky of slow-turning constellations in which the blessed dead once hoped to shine as enduring Akh spirits. We return to these few gentle forms, letting them circle and recircle in the mind until they loosen their outlines and drift. At the very center of all this symbolism, what remained constant was the trust that night is not the end of the story. As you drift now, you may simply borrow that trust, that there is time enough for your heart to grow lighter, that there is space enough for your thoughts to grow still, and that, like the sun upon the horizon, you will rise again from this darkness when the hour is ready. And in that quiet trust, something else continues to shimmer beneath the surface of this Egyptian mythology, something as small and enduring as a single spoken word, the name. For the Egyptians, the Ren, the name, was not a mere label, but a living reality, a thread that bound memory, story, and presence together across 3 millennia of changing dynasties and shifting sands. To speak a name was to acknowledge that a life had unfolded, that a pattern of choices and affections had once moved through the world and still, in some subtle way, lingers. When we remember these myths, when we let the names of Osiris, Isis, Anubis, and Ma'at drift through our thoughts like constellations, we are keeping the Ren of an entire civilization gently alive, allowing its profound wisdom to breathe again for a moment in the darkness of our own night. As we embark on this exploration of endings and echoes, we can turn very softly toward your own name. It too carries a history of gestures and words, of kindnesses you remember and kindnesses you have long forgotten, of small decisions that have shaped the days of others without your ever knowing. Legacy, in this sense, is not the anxious pursuit of fame or monument, but the quiet awareness that every action, however modest, enters the complex tapestry of other lives, moving outward like ripples on the Nile after a single stone touches the surface. You are part of that wider pattern of order and relation, no less than the scribes and farmers and artisans who once looked up at these same stars and whispered their hopes to the gods. The Egyptians faced death with elaborate ritual, not because they were consumed by fear, but because they refused to treat the boundary between worlds as meaningless. For them, the afterlife was a journey to be prepared for with care, dignity, and a certain calm curiosity. To imagine the heart meeting the feather of Ma'at is to imagine that our days matter, that our choices have weight, and yet at the same time that the cosmos is not hostile, but ordered toward balance, truth, and restoration. In this way, their beliefs speak to fundamental human concerns without demanding that we be afraid. They invite us instead to walk slowly, attentively, and to let the thought of our own mortality sharpen rather than darken our appreciation of the present moment. In the nights to come, you may notice how these images continue to captivate us in the most ordinary places. A jackal-headed figure in a museum case, the black silhouette of Anubis watching over a painted bier, a small scarab carved in jewelry or printed on a page, a single feather, white or blue, that call to mind the poised stillness of Ma'at's scales. Whenever such symbols cross your path, you might allow a brief grounding recognition to arise, a sense that you have walked these corridors of the Duat before, that you have sailed with Ra through the hours of darkness, and that this story now belongs, quietly, to you as well. If this long journey beside the Nile has eased your breathing and softened the edges of your thoughts, you are always welcome to return, to let these gods and their stories watch over other nights, or to wander with us through different ancient visions of creation, order, and the world beyond. For now the names have been spoken, the echoes set gently in motion. They can keep their patient vigil while you rest, carrying you, word by word, into sleep.
And so, as these names and images continue their quiet motion beneath the surface of your thoughts, we can gently acknowledge that we have traveled far together tonight, moving slowly through one of humanity's oldest and most intricate visions of death, judgment, and the afterlife, letting Egyptian mythology unfold not as something distant and strange, but as a living reality that still speaks to fundamental human concerns. We have walked beside embalmers and priests, crossed the Duat in imagination, and stood before the scales where a single heart meets a single feather. Along the life-giving banks of the Nile, this complex tapestry of rituals and beliefs took shape across 3 millennia, and what remained constant was the quiet conviction that death was not an abrupt ending, but a transition, a change of state within a larger cosmic order. If, as we embark in this exploration in the soft space between waking and sleep, you have felt some of that profound wisdom settling around you like linen wrappings, you may wish, in time, to keep journeying with us into other ancient visions of creation, judgment, and renewal. When you are ready, you are warmly invited, in a slow and unhurried way, to subscribe or follow so that more sleep stories can find you. Stories that drift through other civilizations and their mythologies of the afterlife, from different gods and different rivers of night, yet always with the same calm depth and reverent pace. We might one evening follow another soul through an underworld of shifting stars, another night listen to distant prayers for safe passage, always returning to these shared questions of meaning, memory, and what it is to endure. If a particular part of this Egyptian journey continues to captivate us in your memory, you might later let us know which path you would like to see opened further. Perhaps you would like to linger with the careful ritual of mummification, tracing each amulet and each spell as if reading a travel manual for the soul.
Perhaps the shadowed corridors and guarded gates of the duat call to you, or the still, intense moment of the weighing of the heart before Osiris, Anubis, and Thoth. Perhaps the wide, sunlit peace of the field of reeds, that idealized Egypt of endless harvests and clear canals, is the place you would choose to rest in for a full, dedicated night. There is no urgency at all. There is nothing you must do. This invitation will be waiting patiently when you wake, like a small lamp left burning in a quiet room, while for now you can simply lie within the lingering symbolism of feathers and stars, boats and green fields, letting them fade and soften at their own pace. So may your night be as ordered as Maat, balanced and serene. May your sleep be as deep and sheltered as the duat, where even the gods move slowly. And may your waking be as fresh and clear as Ra's first light over the Nile, returning you gently to the world with a calmer heart and a quieter mind. And now, as the echoes of Ra's first light over the Nile grow softer in our minds, we let the whole journey we have taken together draw in on itself, like a scroll slowly and carefully rolled closed, its writing still present, but no longer needing to be read aloud tonight. In a single unhurried sweep, we return to the images that have guided us through this complex tapestry of Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife, the quiet tomb where the air is cool and still, the balanced scales standing before Osiris, the feather of Maat waiting in perfect weightless poise, the shining field of reeds stretching out like an idealized Egypt under a gentle, endless dawn, and above and beneath it all, the steady course of the sunbark cutting through the duat with calm cosmic assurance as it has done across 3 millennia. We have stood in imagination beside the stone sarcophagus in that silent chamber, feeling how this mythology was a living reality for those who lay there, wrapped in linen and protected by ritual and symbolism, not as a denial of death, but as a way of placing it within a larger order, where endings and beginnings fold into one another like the two banks of the Nile. Now we allow that tomb door to close, slowly, gently, with the same deliberate care that priests once used when sealing the resting place of a scribe, a craftsman, or a king. And we understand that this closing is not confinement, but completion, the last line of a carefully copied text, the last stroke of a chisel on polished stone, marking that the work of this night's exploration is finished for now. On the inner side of that door, the scales remain balanced, the feather still gleams with profound wisdom, the field of reeds still glows with green abundance, and the sunbark still moves with unhurried certainty through the duat, while for now, on the outer side, where you rest, those same images begin to blur and soften, as if seen through water, losing their sharp edges while keeping their quiet power. We do not need to hold every detail. We can let the names of gods, the gates and spells, the judgments and transformations drift away like footprints in desert sand, trusting that what remained constant was the sense of order, of Maat, of a cosmos in which death is a passage rather than a fall into nothingness. As we embark on this exploration of sleep itself, you have, like the Egyptians who rehearsed their afterlife journey in life, rehearsed a way of thinking about endings and renewals, about how each day, each story, each breath can set like the sun and rise again in another form. So now we grow quiet and quieter still. The tomb door is closed. The journey is complete. Rest well. Good night.